This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building your online brand. Check out the link in the description or stay tuned to learn more.
Switches? Really? Am I scraping the bottom of the barrel looking for transit content? No. Switches are one of the most important components of any Rails system. And dare I say that, like the offside rule, my 1 a.m. tweets, and announcements on the local subway system, far more people claim to understand them than actually do. So let's talk about switches. Today's video is indeed about switches, or turnouts, or points, depending on which term you prefer. Switches are critical because they allow trains to switch from one track to another. Now, before we dive into the different types of switches and varied components, we should start with some basic terminology that anyone should understand before having a talk about switches. This is a switch, as you might be aware. This is a right-hand switch, this is a left-hand switch. This is the diverging route, and this is the main route. These are the point blades, or switch rails, the glorious component without which we truly could not switch. These swing back and forth to literally change the path of the tracks. Now, our first divergence in this video is to mention that not all switches actually have 2 points, or 1 point per rail. Indeed, systems like the Toronto streetcar use single-point switches, which are great. Actually not that great. They restrict speed, they can cause derailments, but hey, they're cheap at least. Now, single-point switches can work because the wheel flanges, which we've talked about in previous videos, remember, flanges, on one side of the streetcar grab the point and pull the streetcar onto the diverging route. What you may have noticed though is that for single-point switches to exist, there cannot be a single continuous rail for the wheels to travel on. And hence, the wheels of the train or tram or streetcar are not necessarily supported all of the time. And this is something we're going to get back to. Now, before we continue onwards, let me switch to telling you about our sponsor.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I recently revamped and recreated my website using Squarespace, and I was blown away with how easily it all came together and how effortless it was to style the pages. Besides just a website builder, Squarespace also offers other ways to help me connect with you, the viewer, such as powerful email campaigns, blogging tools, and analytics on my website. Start building your online brand for free by heading to squarespace.com. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/rmtransit and use code RMTransit to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
The next important component of the switch to talk about, and arguably the second most important component, is the frog, which looks nothing like a frog, at least not that kind of frog. The frog is the pointy bit that sits where the rails cross. Its job is to catch the wheels as they cross on either track, meaning it's often designed with a very narrow angle between its two sides. Frogs are truly the unsung heroes of the railway world. They take an absolute beating from passing trains, whose wheels go from rail to nothing, slamming into this piece of metal hundreds or thousands of times a day. And hence, frogs are not infrequently hardened with explosives, actual explosives. That said, on elite high-speed railways the world over, and on random urban lines in Asia where the need to feel superior to everyone else is strong, there is an alternative, the movable frog. Movable frogs are really cool. They basically turn the frog into another point. This means that no matter which direction a switch is set, there are continuous rail paths for a train passing through the switch. This means a quiet, smooth, and potentially less damaging switching experience for the train, the switch, and everyone involved. Now, while switches are awesome, they do have a nemesis, which I, living in Toronto, am acutely aware of: ice. Ice and snow, for that matter, are not really compatible with switches. They can freeze them in place, or even worse, get between the points and jam them up, preventing the points from switching or being thrown, as the cool kids like to say. Thus, if you watch my videos, you may have noticed that the more used switches that are outdoors in much of Canada tend to have heaters adjacent to them. Often these are electric, but the really good ones are heated with gas, which is just more powerful. With adequate heating, we can keep our switches switching. Now, while switches are great alone, together they can come together to tackle even bigger tasks. Crossovers are switches which connect two parallel tracks, as you often see on a metro or tramway. Double crossovers have a diamond and have switches on both parallel tracks, allowing trains to pass onto the other parallel track within the same space envelope. Now, while double crossovers are great, they are expensive and complicated, and so what you'll notice is that on systems where space constraints aren't as much of a thing, you don't see double crossovers as often. For example, there are metro networks out there that don't have a ton of tunneled tracks that have zero double crossovers at all, simply because they opt to use pairs of single crossovers instead. And it really is true that two can be better than one. A pair of single crossovers is less likely to fail than a single double crossover. They do take up more space, but they're also less expensive and easier to work on. So if you have the space, you're probably better using two. Now, another type of interesting switch is the slip switch. Slip switches are very helpful with crossing tracks, and you often see them at the throats or entrances of stations. Slip switches are interesting because they take crossing tracks and allow you to take a train coming from either end of one side of the crossing and switch it through to either end of the other side. Even better though, putting slip switches together in a big row allows you to create a mechanism, or interlocking, that allows trains from, say, any platform at a station to exit to any station track. This set of slip switches lets trains go this way, this set let them go this way. That said, you could say slip switches are going out of style. And as it turns out, an unlikely but powerful rail team of the Netherlands and Japan are working to convince the world that you really don't need them at all. If you'd like a video on that, leave a comment down below. Now, you might be asking,
why does this matter?
And the truth is, it matters for a ton of reasons. Want to be an engineer? You've got to understand switches. And that counts for both types of engineer. But understanding switches is also important to understanding rail transit, how you can operate it, how you can plan it, how you can design it. More technical points like movable point frogs can be a really helpful antidote to NIMBYs, for example, complaining of loud train. Or perhaps more importantly, a challenge that needs to be overcome. What if you need to install a switch at a certain location, but a transit YouTuber lives next door and he will be infuriated if your trains make too much noise? Movable point frog might be the answer for you. Or just making a lot of noise. That said, sometimes your neighbors need silence and you need a switch. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this brief overview of switches. But should I make a second video? An episode 2 type of situation? A sequel to the Switch saga? Monorail switches? Maglev switches? Outside slip switches? Rack railway switches? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.